Being pissed off at everything is exhausting. I've realized I've made the mistake of changing my banner art to something that insinuates rage and ferocity. Strange how the past few videos I've made haven't been any of that. And to be honest, I'm sort of grateful for that. I've watched E3 last year with full attention and excitement, and that wasn't something I was able to say for a few years. Last year's E3 introduced some of the greatest games I've ever played, including the return of some franchises I never thought I'd even hear from again. And after all that was said and done, I convinced myself that was probably going to be the last good E3 that I would personally ever watch. While at the time that I'm writing this, E3 is almost over, and I'm already considering this as lightning striking twice because somehow you fuckers managed to actually make me happy with what I saw 2 years in a row. I'm over here trying to build a character brand with an abrasive persona, and you assholes decide to just come in and impress the shit out of me twice without fail. I thought DMC5 and Cyberpunk were gonna be the height of it all for me last year, and then this year rolls around and you literally just up and fucking remake Destroy All Humans? Quit making me happy. I'm trying to be mad at things. Fuck. Anyways, as much as I'd love to sling around my usual fire and brimstone and talk about how displeased I am with where games have been headed as of late, I'm actually sort of relieved that, at least so far, I've only had the exact opposite to say about how things are being presented this year. At least a good half of the titles were actually able to catch my attention, partly because they just so happen to be titles that I recognize from when I was 10, and what makes me happier than anything in the world, just as ripe as a fucking pineapple, is that people are finally beginning to display at least a sliver of skepticism towards the borderline sociopathic, shit-polishing, one-dimensional, unprincipled, guerrilla marketing galactic fucking lobotomites at the wheel of EA's content plan.
But no, we've got lightsabers now.
Yeah, sounds pretty cool. Let me know when it's finished. Now, for the first time in what seems like an eternity, people are displaying an interest in titles that don't usually even hit mainstream, and single-player experiences that focus more on developing a good plot, art style, and control system. I've stood on my soapbox plenty of times when it came to talking about how good Hollow Knight was and how you're fucking up on an intergalactic level if you aren't playing it, and don't get me wrong, that statement is as true now as the first time I ever said it on here. But the instance where I've walked away from an E3 conference stream actually feeling like I have something to look forward to in the next few months is a feeling I honestly kinda missed. I was expecting details about Cyberpunk and Elden Ring right out of the gate, and despite those scratches definitely being satisfied, most of my attention has honestly been on this sudden surge of revisiting old IPs and bringing them up to date with the remake. If you had told me in the future that Cyberpunk 2077, a game that I've been looking forward to for I think 7 years now, was literally going to get slapped with a release date, and the thing I was going to be most excited for was being able to play a remake of this obscure SpongeBob game that I didn't even know anyone else gave a shit about, I would have respectfully offered that you took a dive in front of a moving tractor. Alas, here we are. It's 2019 and I'm drooling over trailers like an idiot for SpongeBob, Psychonauts 2, and Destroy All Humans after just now starting to get bored with the Crash and Spyro remakes. Because, I don't know, that's just the kind of person I am, I guess. I wasn't really expecting a trend hinging itself on the nostalgia of these old, obscure games to garner the popularity it has. Call me a lobotomite if you want, but I actually did kind of let myself get a tad scared at EA's daunting conclusion that single-player games were actually starting to die. And although I don't think I ever fully believed them from the jump, watching their business plan go tits up in the process has still been pretty sweet. Sony made an announcement a while back confirming that they weren't going to be participating in E3 with any sort of big showcase or public event related to the E3 conference. But that hasn't stopped them from beating a lot of other teams to the punch and just pushing out piss loads of trailers for these smaller games, a couple of which actually seem to resemble earlier PS2 classics like Jak and Daxter or The Legend of Kay, just to name a couple. PS2 classics that I used to spend hours a night bloodshotting my 9-year-old underdeveloped retinas to until my parents told me to stop. Hell, I've still got a couple Ty the Tasmanian Tiger games stashed away somewhere in the recesses of my closet. I think the only one I'm missing being Ty 3, aka the worst one, and if you disagree, you are literally a flat earther. If we aren't counting Double Fine divulging trailers for the new Psychonauts, Xbox announcing Halo Infinite, and Activision finally figuring out the correct way to make a fucking reboot, there are still some games to pay attention to if you indulged in the earlier classics back in the day. So hopefully we can take a break from all the Halos and Call of Duties to focus on a few that might fly under the radar. Baldo, for instance, is a new whimsical open-world action-adventure game with puzzles, dungeons, and the Ghibli-esque art style. The game takes place in a magical land called Rhodia, with towns full of of all sorts of weird characters you can interact with. The combat doesn't seem like much, but these sorts of games usually aren't focused on the combat as much as they are with other things, like visual storytelling, atmosphere, and playability. The only weapon I even caught a glance of was a very ordinary looking sword strapped to your back that, if I had to guess, is probably only there for self-defense purposes, like shaking off a single enemy. This doesn't look like the type of game to have you mowing down zombies and demons of the like. And I think what I find most admirable about it is that it's able to look new and refreshing while also kind of giving off this nostalgic PS1 sort of vibe. It's also an open world game with tons of side quests and different paths to go down. And the fact that it's 2019 and I'm seeing an open world sandbox that takes its level design even somewhat seriously sounds like a game worth investing in. But despite Baldo's alluring art style and level design, I don't feel like it would scratch the itch for someone like me that favors a little more sword with his sword. And I see a lot of that potential in Ari and the Secret of the Seasons. The game takes place in this magical land called Valdi, with towns full of all sorts of weird... Wait a minute. Yeah, I've definitely seen this somewhere before. One thing people tend to forget about these older cartoonish PS2 games is how overlapping their stories always kind of seem to be. Despite being both mechanically and visually different in tons of ways, any random handful of these games usually indulged in the same storytelling tropes. A whimsical fantasy setting where there's a kid/animal or whatever doing chores and watering plants and just living his best life and such, when suddenly an age-old evil, demonic, powerful, evil presence awakens in the dark and dangerous realm of far as fuckawayopolis. And it turns out you're the fated chosen one with mystical powers and you're the only warrior that can save us from this evil because I found this ancient stone tablet in the backyard that says so. What do you mean it's made of plastic? Here, take this shitty sword made of rock and splinters that may as well not even exist because you're gonna open a random chest and find a better one before you've even left the village. I hope your 15 minutes of intense, grueling combat training with our neighborhood's designated Ninja Turtle ripoff has been worth it because demons have invaded your home and your parents just got captured. Good fucking luck! You play as a young girl named Ari, who has the power to manipulate seasons and weather around her to fend off enemies. While it does appear more combat-oriented than Baldo, it also has its fair share of platforming, puzzles, and exploration. It seems to play a lot like PS2 generation action-adventure games like Jak and Daxter, and I unfortunately can't play it for you for copyright-related reasons, but it's also got a really familiar and kiddish soundtrack that drives home the nostalgia even further. You seem to encounter a pretty cartoonish variety of enemies, like talking mushrooms, hyenas, stone birds, and cannon-wielding gremlins with futures so bright even they need shades. I think they might take an interesting approach with this because it seems to bring a new idea to the common 4-element magic system, only instead of earth, fire, water, and air, you've got the 4 seasons to work with. Which I guess in retrospect can kind of be argued as the exact same thing, so whatever. I don't know if anyone else ever played this game called The Darkest Fairy on PS2, but if you can imagine that being given a re-release in 2019 on the Switch, well, this is basically what it would look like. It's a nice change of pace, I think, seeing a game with fantasy elements that doesn't involve some dark, brooding, depressive atmosphere. It really does feel like I'm back in 2003, watching whimsical, cartoonish fantasy adventures and horror games that actually look scary. Such is the case with Devolver Digital's Carrion, which you may recognize by its development title, Super Meat Boy is Fucking Pissed. This was teased a year or so ago, but we didn't really get a good look at what exactly it was or what it was aiming to accomplish. Turns out, Devolver is trying their hand at a reverse horror game where, instead of running and escaping from this monster in the dark, it decides to put you in the shoes of the anomaly. In Russia, Spaghetti Eats You contains the same pixelated graphics seen in other games Devolver has published, like Hotline Miami, Enter the Gungeon, and The Messenger. Other than looking like it was directed by John Carpenter instead of Chad Stahelski, the game seems to fall in line with Devolver's style pretty well. SpongeBob's The Appetizer seems to borrow elements from popular horror movies with movement and stealth mechanics that feel less like stealth and more like hunting. Such a movement includes riding and crawling on ceilings and up walls, what looks like a camouflage or invisibility power, and the horrifying ability to stretch and thus even further malform yourself like demented silly putty. That said, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Genocide doesn't look like a game that'll appeal to everyone right out of the gate, but I think the people that don't like this particular style could still appreciate the very hungry viscera for its originality. I have a list of these, like, written down, if you want me to know. Alright. But the odd thing is, I don't even feel that intimidated by a pixelated version of The Thing. Like, how in the world is this even supposed to be You know what? Fine. Sure. I'll play it. Fine. The last game on my list I wanted to give some well-deserved lip service to would have to be Spiritfarer. And now that I said that out loud, I'm kind of thinking about rewriting that transition. I don't have time. Fuck it, Rusty. Do it in one take or you're a pussy. Spitfarer is being developed by Thunder Lotus Games, the same team behind Jotun and Sundered, two games that apparently have the combined total fan base of me. Spiritfarer focuses on telling the story of a fairy master to the deceased, albeit retold in a more vibrant and kid-friendly way. I've always noticed the three best universes for making games are Greek myth, Norse myth, and Lovecraft. They've got the last two covered for sure, so I guess it was only a matter of time until they dug this one up. But more than anything, I think Spiritfarer is a testament to how important first impressions really are. Save maybe Death Stranding and Elden Ring, I can't think of another game I've seen recently where the trailer tells me batshit fucking hell about the game, and that somehow makes me want to play it more. That's probably one of the best and most obvious tells that whatever you're making here, you're probably onto something. A cozy management game about dying? Learn how to say goodbye? Jesus shit, does the collector's edition come with its own box of Kleenexes and a bucket? Jokes aside, it's usually a really exciting time when a game this emotionally charged gets released. I like the idea of taking a subject this harrowing and making it into a wholesome experience that can be digested a little easier. Pretty much all of this aligns with the legend of the fairy master Karen and the river Styx. Styx, the goddess of the river, is actually translated into the English word hate, which was why they decided to not go with the name Styx, but instead Stella. I'm joking. I don't know if that's what it was or not. You know what? All the pieces are there. Someone make something out of it. I just realized that I've pushed forward this really weird and seemingly sponsored call to action that makes it sound like I've divided myself into multiple parts that are all up the ass of a different dev team or company. But I assure you that isn't the case. The reason I decided to turn away from games like Ori or Breath of the Wild 2 was because these are games with massive followings that are likely going to get discovered no matter what. Psychonauts 2 and Destroy All Humans are also great examples of this, which is why I didn't feel inclined to give them that big of a mention. I chose these specific games to tell you about because they're some of the most original, and given their style, they're also some of what I predict to have the highest likelihood of getting overshadowed and just lost in the noise of post-E3 excitement. And as a closing remark, I'll just go ahead and say that the past two E3 conferences, while, inevitably falling short in some places, actually managed to show me lots of stuff that impressed me and made me excited for what was to come. If you feel as though these past few conventions have all just been wave after wave of disappointment and yet more reasons for media companies and independent content creators to bank off all the negative energy, I'm certainly not going to try and change your opinion on that, but I might suggest taking a look in other places. Then again, most of the trailers and announcements that got me excited were released by companies that had no presentation at E3 this year. So, interpret that however you want, I guess.